Good morning, this is Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau. It's Friday, so it's our Talk to a Farmer, Talk to a Rancher. In this case today, as our series is on water, my guest is a water lawyer. So we bring in all stakeholders to what we talk about with agriculture, Arizona agriculture. And for those that are joining us live, you're going to enjoy a very good conversation with Rhett Larson. He is, again, Richard Morrison Professor of Water Law at ASU's Sandra Day O'Connor Law School, College of Law. And you are a Senior Research Fellow at the Kyle Center for Water Policy. And obviously, you focus on water law, and the Colorado River's current situation as of today.
As of a few moments ago.
As of a few moments ago, because you just told me they released the
record of decision just came out a few minutes ago.
And that record of decision is the 2-year plan.
It will include the operating guidelines for the next 2 years.
Okay. And literally, because it just dropped.
I know enough about it to have read the press releases on it, but I haven't been able to dig into the details quite yet.
And with a legal mind, you need to dig into the details.
I will definitely need to it will be a long document. I'll have to spend a lot of time digging in.
Well, Attorney Rhett, you told me to call you Rhett, but I'm still going to call you Attorney Rhett.
Okay.
Tell me about you. What's your background? All that fun stuff.
Sure. So I'm a 7th generation Arizonan.
Awesome.
I'm born and raised here. I grew up in Yuma. So people ask how you get into water law. You grow up in Yuma, Arizona, a few steps away from where the Colorado River meets Arizona, California, and Mexico. So I come from a farming and a ranching family. We've been here for generations. But I got into water law at a pretty early age. It was always something I was passionate about ever since I was thinking about being a lawyer.
So
I've been doing it now for over 20 years, represented a whole bunch of different clients, eventually made my way into being a law professor, but I still work as an attorney. I'm the general counsel for AMWA, which is the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association. So it's sort of a group of 10 large central Arizona cities, but I still represent farmers and ranchers occasionally.
So does your family still farm in Yuma?
I still, no. So most of my family is not in Yuma anymore. We've gradually made our way up here. I went to high school in Gilbert.
Oh, okay. So did I.
Oh, great.
You're a lot younger than me, though. I won't say when he graduated, no. But go Tigers, right?
I was a Hawk, actually.
So what's...
I was Highland.
Highland, there you go. So because I did a lot of research on you, and some of these questions are kind of complicated, I'm reading them almost word for word.
Okay.
So knowing what we know about the Colorado River, where we are today, from your expert perspective as a water attorney, how did we get here?
Well, we are in the mess that we're in right now probably because of 2 reasons. Number one is in 1922, when we figured out how to split up the water of the river, we thought that there would have been around 18 million acre feet in the river every year because the data we were using was based on flood years. And so we overestimated how much water was going to be in the river. And so because of that, we promised more water in the 1920s than the average river was ever going to be able to pay out. And that problem right there creates a lot of our issues, is that the river just doesn't have as much water in it as we thought it did. The river is changing, so it's getting even less and less water than it had before. And so because our air is getting so dry and our soils are so dry that even when we get a good wet winter, we get a lot of snowpack, that snow never really melts and makes its way to the river anymore. It just gets sucked up by that dry, hot air. And so even we made promises the river couldn't keep, and now the river is shrinking even more. Add on top of that in the 1920s, we sort of did a King Solomon and split the baby in half. We sort of cut the river in half and said half of it goes to the upper basin, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Wyoming, and half of it goes to Arizona, Nevada, and California. But we didn't know in the 1920s how these states were going to grow. And now 75% of the population is in the lower basin, 75% of the economic production is in the lower basin, 75% of the agricultural production is in the lower basin. But we split the river evenly, and that has ended up being a big mistake. So if I had to tell you like the main reason we're mad at each other right now, bad math from the beginning, a changing river, and we just split a river in half when we probably should have split it 3/4, 1/4.
Wow. And when you think about when that all occurred, 1922, we're well over 100 years later, when things have so dramatically changed, not even just because of the changes in weather, but even technology changes.
Yeah, one of the things I try and emphasize to people is if I had to boil down the problem into something pithy and memorable, I would say the problem that we're having is that we have 19th century laws, we have 20th century infrastructure, but we have a 21st century climate, population, and economy.
Wow. Boy, we've got a lot of fixing to do. So reservoirs are at historic lows and the structural deficit persists. In your view, what combination of operational changes, conservation, and augmentation? We're starting to talk more about augmentation. A lot of times people think, well, let the cities worry about augmentation, but really in agriculture, we need to think about augmentation. All of this is a reality, and it's needed to prevent dead pool risks at Powell and Meade in the next few years. How do we resolve this?
Well, I think the great word that you used was combination, which is there isn't going to be a silver bullet. You'll hear a lot in the base right now. People know silver bullet, silver buckshot. So it's going to take a combination of issues. On operational issues, we're going to need, and it looks like in the new record of decision on operating guidelines, we'll have something along these lines, at least for the first 2 years, is a consultation process that tells us when Powell and Meade are facing real concerns that there's going to be agreements with how the upper initial units, those dams that are operated by reclamation in the upper basin, like Flaming Gorge, like Navajo, how they will be operated to maintain critical levels in both Powell and Meade. So there are going to be operational issues we're going to have to address just to make sure that we don't run into power pool and then ultimately effective dead pool. So there will be operational changes. I'm hopeful that the new operating guidelines will at least be promising for how we'll manage it for the next 2 years. Conservation is going to have to be a part of the issue. We just have to start adapting to a new river. Conservation will mean we're going to have to explore ways for farmers to start shifting to either much more efficient technologies, much more efficient irrigation methodologies, or potentially shifting to more efficient crops. But to expect farmers to do that without providing them the capital and the credit they need to be able to make those shifts and the markets that they need, as we sometimes say, well, why don't farmers just move from growing alfalfa to growing rubber plants? And it's like, well, because there's a huge market for alfalfa and there isn't really a great local market for rubber plants. And so if we're expecting farmers to make those shifts, they need access to capital and credit, and we have to start developing markets that are going to put demands on those more efficient crops. Cities are obviously going to have to address non-revenue water. They're going to have to fix leaks. It doesn't do us very good, and our cities are really efficient, but there are ways that we can improve. It doesn't do us very much good to go to farmers and tell farmers you need to be more efficient with your water. If you go to farmers and say be more efficient and because it'll make housing more affordable and it'll increase jobs, that's a pretty good pitch. But if the pitch is there's going to be a bunch of grass and medians, and then that's not a very good pitch. So there are things that we can do in the urban world to be able to be more efficient. And then on the augmentation side, it's absolutely critical. I mean, Arizona is a remarkably water efficient state. We do a really good job here of being careful with our water, and most of the low hanging conservation fruit has been picked. So to get major gains in conservation now is going to cost us a lot of money. Conservation won't be cheap. And we probably can't conserve our way out of this problem entirely. Conservation can go a long way, but not all the way, which means we need new water supplies. And probably the most important thing we can do on that front is a dedicated revenue source to fund new water projects. We need a situation where, and hopefully it's a partnership across governmental levels, federal, state, local, with engagement from the private sector, so that we have a pot of money that no one else can touch for any other reason that goes only to water augmentation projects. And I think that's probably one of the most important reforms that we can look at as a state, is to make progress on a dedicated revenue source for augmentation, like desalination, like advanced water recycling, those kinds of things.
Do you see one that seems more promising than another in the augmentation area?
Well, promising in the very short term is probably partnering with California, given that San Diego made a lot of investments in their Carlsbad desalination plant, and they've made a lot of investments in conservation. So at this stage, San Diego really has more water than they need, and that infrastructure is already built. And so In the short term, it makes a ton of sense for us to find a way to partner with San Diego to do a water exchange to support their desalination project and perhaps have them do a water exchange of some of their Colorado River water. It won't be a lot of water and it will probably be fairly expensive, but we'll learn a lot from trying to do this, and it'll teach us the kinds of lessons we need to learn if we're going to do other more advanced projects like building desalination plants in California or Mexico. I do think desalination is going to be an important part of our water supply portfolio in the future, and it will require us to partner with neighboring jurisdictions like Mexico and California. Advanced water recycling, I think, is also going to be important because it's on the other side of this, which is desalination requires us to engage with Mexico and California, whereas water recycling is hyper-localized. So you'll have a lot of cities and towns who are going to be concerned about relying on San Diego or Mexico for a portion of their water supply, whereas advanced water recycling, that's extra water you can get that your local community has complete control over. And so there are real upsides to making the kinds of investments we can in advanced water recycling.
Pausing for station identification, so to speak. This is Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau, and I'm interviewing Rhett Larson, a water attorney here at the Sandra Day O'Connor Law College. And if you have any questions, just give a yell. We may not be able to answer it during the segment. We'll try to follow up if we can. So literally when I wrote these questions, we did have the Bureau of Reclamation's final EIS, an environmental study, released. And that happened, I think, in July.
About 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, 3 weeks ago. And then we were still waiting for the 2-year, operating plan. It just released today. So talk about, being right on the cusp of all this. And I know you haven't been able to drill down into the details, but you did read the release. Is there anything what was your impression based on the release that they just let out today, so to speak?
Well, it looks like the lower basin proposal, roughly like the lower basin proposal that was made in May. So the lower basin states, Arizona, California, Nevada, they came together and pitched an agreement that they had reached about how they could operate for the first 2 years of this 10-year federal plan. And that first 2 year was going to include a 1.25 million acre foot cut that was going to be spread across Arizona, California, Nevada, and with a plan to have Mexico take a cut as well. This will mean it looks like about 760,000 acre feet worth of cuts to Arizona, which would be a 20% cut. It will be painful. Everyone is going to feel the pain of this cut, and how it gets spread across the various different Colorado River users remains to be seen. So one thing I would caution people about is they may read the record of decision today and the operating guidelines and go, oh, it's done. Now we know what's going to happen for the next 2 years. I'm not sure that's completely right yet, because we're still going to have to finalize some of these agreements, because there's still some I's to dot and T's to cross with our neighboring states. We're going to have to make sure that Mexico is on board and that the kinds of cuts we anticipate them taking, which is about 250,000 acre feet, that those are also secured, and that's a complex negotiation in of itself. And then even if all of that gets agreed to, there's going to be an internal intra-Arizona conversation about how we spread those cuts around the different users. And because interstate agreements in Arizona have to be approved by our state legislature, there's a very good chance that we will have to have a special session for the state legislature in order to approve this agreement. And if that happens, it adds another layer of sort of politics and conversation. So while it looks like the record of decision is going to do roughly what we would have predicted it was going to do, because we were hopeful that the lower basin proposal would be accepted, it looks like that's the case, not having read everything quite yet. But even if it is the case, there's still some remaining uncertainty.
And 2 years doesn't give us a lot of time to like parcel that out. It's almost like taking several baskets, putting them on the table and saying, you get this in this basket, you get that in that basket. 2 years to get all that done is going to be kind of intimidating.
It's going to be really hard. Everyone going into this negotiation was hopeful that we would be able to do what we did in 2007, which was build a durable 20-year system that everyone could predict. What we're getting instead is a 10-year broad framework, but every 2 years, potentially something new. And that, while it's a flexible system that allows us to adapt as the river is changing, it doesn't create a lot of certainty. So everyone is constantly going, well, I know what's going to happen for the next 18 months, but what's going to happen right after that? And it also puts us in a perpetual state of negotiation for 10 years.
And that could be easy. You think out of this litigation will occur?
Right now, it's difficult for me to see how this doesn't end up in court. I don't want to say it's inevitable. It's possible that federal government control over the upper initial units will be frustrating enough for the upper basin that they will want to come to the table again. It's also possible that the threat of litigation is that much uncertainty and that much cost is enough to push everyone back to the table as well. And it's also possible that hydrology is going to push us back to the table, that we're all going to go, you know what, the river's just not behaving the way we wanted it to. We're staring down the barrel of another below average winter, and we have no choice but to come back to the table. So there's a chance that we come up with a negotiated solution, but I wouldn't bet on it. I think we're going to sue each other.
And the fact that we have these I call them two-year rotating issues. Things will change in 2 years with over a 10-year period. That it might force us to try to negotiate more, but I tell you, this is a tough one.
Yeah, and litigation has a place. People sometimes say, oh, litigation is the worst possible outcome. I'm not sure it's the worst. It's definitely not the best. But I don't know that it's the worst. The worst outcome for Arizona may be where we are right now. This much uncertainty and cuts that are this big with no cuts to the upper basin is about as bad a situation as Arizona could have expected to be in at this point. And litigation serves a purpose. When you have people who are arguing with each other and negotiating, and they're no longer talking to each other very well, and at least one of them isn't facing any consequences for refusing to talk, it's time for litigation.
Yeah.
Because litigation forces people to talk to each other, it creates a structure for them to talk to each other, and it imposes costs on you if you don't negotiate. If you don't negotiate, you got to pay your lawyer a lot of money. And so if litigation becomes a catalyst for negotiation, if it pushes us back to the table again, litigation is a good investment. If litigation turns into 15, 20 years of arguing in court, spending tens of millions of dollars on lawyer fees instead of tens of millions of dollars on water projects, and we have an uncertain outcome with 9 judges in Washington, D.C., 8 of whom have never lived west of the Mississippi and don't know anything about water law. That's a big gamble. So if it forces us to negotiate and come up with a solution, litigation's a great idea. If we get bogged down, it's a big risk.
Repeat something you said earlier, because I really want to get that in my brain. You know, you said, like Solomon, they split the baby, and maybe they shouldn't have split the baby. 75% of production and population is in the lower basin states. Okay. And I think that's something that we need to keep in our brain to realize the disparities. And I think your suggestion would have been maybe 2/3 in the lower basin and 1/3 in the upper basin. Or
what would have made a lot of sense would have been, rather than making just big raw water allocations, would have been to say everybody gets a percentage of the available water. So whatever water's there, this state gets 23% and that state gets 17%, because then we automatically adapt to drought conditions. You just get your cut of whatever's there instead of a guaranteed quantity of water. Had we done that and based it on some good math, we would probably be in a better situation than we are now.
It's tough. So Arizona faces the largest share of the initial lower basin cuts due to its junior priority. What are the most significant legal vulnerabilities or opportunities? It could be an opportunity for Arizona in the federal framework, especially now that we, have the operating plan. And how might the Central Arizona Project and municipal users adapt in the near term?
So I'm glad you said challenges and opportunities, because it is sort of a double-edged sword, which is in 1968, we enacted the Colorado River Basin Project Act. And in that act, Arizona made a deal with California. Arizona said, it doesn't do us any good to have all this Colorado River water if we can't at least get some of it into central Arizona, into Phoenix and Tucson. But we need to build a big canal, and we don't have enough money to build a big canal, which means we need the federal government to fund it. And if we're gonna get the federal government to fund it, we need California's congressional delegation on our side. So we went to California and said, will you support this legislation? And California said, we'll support it, but only if you agree that that big canal is the junior user in the lower basin. So if there are cuts, that canal takes the cuts before we ever take a dime of cuts.
And that's the Central Arizona
Now
Project.
that is the Central Arizona Project Canal that brings, 35 to 40% of the water supply of Central Arizona. That comes from that one canal. Now,
So we had to get up something in order to get a big canal.
Right.
Which was a huge and amazing project.
an amazing project and an innovative thing that has allowed us to grow to the way that we are now. But back then, we thought this is an almost inexhaustible supply of water. We don't know what we're going to do with all of that water. And we thought, well, being junior user, what difference does it make? Because we'll never have shortages. And now we're learning that shortages were coming and we're facing the consequences. Now, there is a flip side to this. One of the flip sides is Arizona agreed that we were going to be the junior user in the lower basin. The Central Arizona Project would be the junior user in the lower basin. We didn't agree that we were junior to everyone. And right now, there seems to be an argument that says, well, that the Central Arizona Project is somehow junior to Colorado or junior to Utah, and we don't accept that argument at all. We did say we were junior to California, but we didn't say we were junior to Colorado. There's also some statements in the Colorado River Basin Project Act that create opportunities Arizonans should be aware of, which is that act says, yes, the Central Arizona Project is junior
To
California. But if someday we augment our water supply to the point that we are satisfying the lower basin's obligation to Mexico, so about 0.83 million acre feet, 830,000 acre feet. If we augment our supply to that point, the Central Arizona Project will cease being junior to California.
Wow.
So when we talk about investing in water augmentation, when we talk about investing in particularly desalination projects, new water supplies, the value there is not just that we get a new augmented diversified supply, as valuable as that is. It's also the potential that we can buy our way out of junior priority for the Central Arizona Project, which is why a dedicated revenue stream for new water projects is such an important thing for Arizona's future.
Wow, cool. Going back to that 1922 compact that's now over 100 years old, and the delivery obligations, the non-depletion language, and the 10-year rolling average are under renewed scrutiny as flows risk falling below thresholds. How likely is interstate litigation over these provisions? And what would a Supreme Court resolution mean for the law of the river, if there is any?
I think that the likelihood of litigation between the states is high.
Okay.
I think that there's almost no way. So the upper basin has to deliver 75 million acre feet over the course of 10 years. So it works out to 7.5 million acre feet, but it's really an average of 7.5 million acre feet. We need 75 million over 10 years. There's almost no world in which that's not about to be breached. They are almost certainly going to deliver less than 75 million acre feet by this fall. And it's hard to see a scenario where that doesn't result in litigation. And when states sue each other, it goes straight to the United States Supreme Court with no appeals process. And the United States Supreme Court, generally in these big, complex interstate water conflicts, which come up fairly regularly, when they happen, the U.S. Supreme Court usually appoints what's called a special master to oversee it, because the special master, the Supreme Court is intimidated by these big water lawsuits. They have the special master is a fact finder and then makes legal recommendations, and they tend to be very powerful. The Supreme Court usually listens to them. So if this goes to the Supreme Court, and I think it probably will, there will probably be an appointed special master, and we don't know who that is or what they will think or their attitudes or even how much of an expert in water law they will be. And so it's a big gamble. It may be necessary for Arizona to protect its rights, but it's a big gamble because we don't know who that person's going to be. Most of the Supreme Court, they are not water experts, and most of them know very little about Western water law. And this is a very complicated area, and there's a very uncertain outcome. The upper basin has an argument that is plausible, and we can't think, Arizona should not think, oh, if we sue, it'll go straight to the United States Supreme Court, it'll be a 9-0 decision, and it'll be over in 3 years. there's a very good chance that it will take a long time. Florida and Georgia sued each other over sharing the Apalachicola-Chattahoochee River. And that lawsuit went on for almost 20 years and cost Florida about $70 million, and they lost. So while litigation may be necessary to protect our rights, I think we have to go into it with our eyes opened that it could cost a lot of money, it could take a lot of time, there's an uncertain outcome, and in that interim period while we're all suing each other, we still got to figure out what to do with the river.
Right. Wow. Knowing its complexity, can you give a layman's overview of our complex water law, if one exists? I mean, so often someone has aspirations to be in law, and then when they look at some of the complexity of that, they say, no, I'll pass on the law degree. So is there a way that you can give a layman's overview, or at least some piece of it that we would really need to understand?
So I'm a dad. I've got 4 kids, and professionally I'm a water lawyer. So my entire life is about helping people who are arguing over shared scarce resources. And so a lot of my kids' arguments sound a lot like water law. So when I help people understand water law, I usually just listen to my kids. So I had a situation a little while ago where we were all going to go get in the car after a movie, and we were coming out of the movie theater, and one of my kids goes, "Shotgun." And the oldest goes, "You can't just call shotgun. You have to say shotgun when you see the car." So we round the corner, we see the car in the parking lot, and another kid goes, "Shotgun." And my daughter goes, "You can't just see the car and yell shotgun. You have to be standing on the same surface as the car and yell shotgun." At which point she hopped onto the blacktop, said shotgun, and the other kids were like, "Whoa, that's the law. We all just got defeated." So
I love it.
Water law is a lot like calling shotgun. It's whoever got it first. But just like my daughter made it complicated, water law gets complicated too. So it's about whoever got to the river first and pulled the water out and put it to beneficial use has superior claim to that water. So if I go to the river in 1880 and I take 10 acre feet out to irrigate corn, and someone else shows up in 1900 and takes 10 acre feet out to mine copper, and one year there's 8 acre feet in the river, farmer gets everything, miner gets nothing. One year there's 12 acre feet in the river, farmer gets 10, miner gets 2. And that's how it works. Now I sometimes tell people, when we go to the dinner table, my kids all run to the dinner table, their arguments sound a lot like water law arguments, because one of them will say, "Well, I got here first, so I should get the food." And one of them will say, "Well, I'm the biggest, I need to eat the most, so I should get the food." And one of them says, "I'm the littlest, I need to grow the most, so I should get the food." And one of them will say, "Well, I'm the middle kid and everybody ignores me, so this is my chance to get people to pay attention to me." And you hear that and you're like, oh, they are arguing over food, but also they're arguing about their place in the family. And that's true of water arguments too, is that sometimes water is a symbol that people are arguing about sovereignty or respect, and they're making a complex cultural argument through the water. And as a dad, I sometimes know that, well, what happens if I just open another bag of chips? Will everybody calm down? Well, that's water augmentation, right? Which is, well, if I just put enough in the system, will the argument go away? Sometimes it's true, but if the argument's not really about food, it's not really about water, it's about respect, sovereignty, control.
Your place.
Yeah, your place, then no amount of water is going to make that argument go away.
Wow.
And so sometimes we have to stop and go, are we really arguing about water, or is there something deeper here that the water symbolizes that we need to tackle that augmentation's not going to make go away?
Wow. I love your metaphors. I love your children's illustration.
Well, my other family metaphor lately has been, I tell people, listen, if you have 7 kids and, they're all squabbling with each other, they can get away with arguing over dessert if mom and dad are okay. If mom and dad are doing okay, then kids can fight over who gets Rice Krispie treats after dinner. But if mom is sick in bed and dad is drunk in the garage, those 7 kids have no choice but to figure out how to make macaroni and cheese. And right now, mom is sick in bed. Mother Nature is not going to help us. And right now, dad, the federal government, he is drunk in the garage. He's not going to give us any more money. He's not paying his allowance. He's not helping Arizona. He's not he's not coming to help us. And I think if the upper basin thinks, oh, but dad is helping us, Is he though? Like, if Dad decides to step in and run those upper initial units to protect Powell and Meade, maybe you just turned a lot of power over to Dad and he's not really on your side. I think we're at a stage now in the family where these 7 squabbling kids, we have to pull together and make a mediocre box of macaroni and cheese and accept that none of us are terribly happy about it.
And eat it despite.
And eat it despite.
Even though we might rather have steak. You have described the mismatch of the 18th, 19th century legal concepts, 20th century infrastructure, and 21st century climate and demand. How should the law of the river evolve through negotiation, legislation, or litigation to better handle this, aridification, if I'm saying the word right, and this variability? Again, 1922, according to what you said earlier, they were basing all those estimates because we had so much available water, a lot of flooding, actually. What do we do now?
Well, again, I think you're right to say that it's going to have to happen in lots of different ways. Negotiation, legislation. I would say that on the negotiation side, what would be really helpful is if we all just accepted the reality that 1.5 million acre feet flies away every year. So 1.5 million acre feet just evaporates and flies away. If we spread that 1.5 million acre feet over all Colorado River users across the entire basin and just said, hey, you move this much Colorado River this far in an unlined canal, this much gets lost to evapotranspiration. So everybody takes a little bit of a haircut to account for evapotranspiration. That's 1.5 million acre feet. We just found that everybody takes a little bit of a haircut on. That negotiation would help us go a long way right there. What we can do with legislation is we need to facilitate the kind of creative interjurisdictional changes we're talking about with San Diego so that we're not letting the law get in our way, so that it's a little bit easier for us to make sort of temporary leases based on augmentation projects, so that if you are having, if California's got a little bit of extra water, that we can do some temporary deals that can move a little faster. I think there are too many bureaucratic and legal hurdles for interjurisdictional water exchanges that I don't think are going to be helpful. And then the other thing is that we just need funding. And one of my frustrations is sometimes people will go, especially people who don't live in the basin, they'll see on the national media that we're having water problems, and they'll say, well, you dum-dums moved to the desert, of course you have water problems. And my answer to them is, first of all, if you like eating salad in the wintertime, then you eat our water constantly. Your nutrition depends upon the management of this river. So don't judge the very thing that's feeding you. The other thing I would say is if you have a problem with cities and farms along the banks of desert rivers, your problem is with 10,000 years of human civilization. We are a desert species, and the first places we learned to live with each other and grow food and build cities were on the banks of the Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Indus. Desert rivers are the great incubators of civilization. They're the great food baskets of civilization. We grow food in the desert because of the climate, not despite the climate. It's a great place to grow food. And so I want people to go, this is important for the entire United States of America, these issues in the Colorado River Basin. And we spend an insane amount of money protecting people along the Gulf Coast from flooding and hurricanes. A fraction of the federal dollars we spend protecting people from floods and hurricanes in the Southeast, a fraction of that could go a long way towards helping us. Yeah. So we need to start treating aridification in the Southwest as a major national issue that requires funding at least semi-comparable to the kinds of funding the federal government gives for flood control.
And I'm always told by the experts that our production per acre in the West is triple, sometimes quadruple what they can do in the Midwest with producing food because of the fact these arid climates are ideal for photosynthesis for our plants, for growth, and then all we need is that spearheaded, managed, irrigated, controlled environment, and that's basically what we do in the West.
And I think people say, well, why don't you just move a lot of alfalfa production to Georgia? And I tell people, if you tried to move our alfalfa production to Georgia, you would go from 11 or 12 cuttings a year to 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Because we don't have floods, we don't have freezes. There's a reason it's getting grown here and it's so productive. And I want the entire country to know that what we do here is critical for everyone, and it deserves the same amount of federal dollars, or at least more federal dollars, as the kind of federal dollars we spend for flood control.
Yeah. And I've asked you a little bit about this, but let's dig a little bit deeper. These priority systems, prior appropriation, and the hierarchy among states and users, it's obviously colliding. We've been speaking to that with physical scarcity. Are there viable legal reforms such as more flexible shortage sharing or temporary transfers that could reduce conflict without upending the settled rights? Or do we have to change the law?
Well, I had this conversation, just it was a couple of years ago with a group of architects, and I was explaining to them water law. And one of them said, well, if man can make this system, man can unmake it. So if this system isn't working, let's unmake it. And one of the things I tell people is, this prior appropriation system was designed to do a very important job. The United States of America had vast, arid lands that it wanted settled and developed. How do you get a lot of smart, hardworking people to run into the middle of the desert and start building stuff? You make a law that promises them, run, and if you win the race, you'll win the most valuable thing you can own in the desert. Water.
Yeah.
And so people ran as fast as they could into the desert. They grabbed that water because it was a winner of the race. It's first in time. It's a great law for settling a desert. It's not a great law for managing a desert. And it did what it was designed to do. It got a lot of smart, hardworking people to move here and build a great civilization. But it's not great at managing this new economy and this new population and this new climate. But if we tried to tear it down and rebuild something new, it would create as much conflict as it would solve, because you would be going into people who have water rights. Their great-great-great-grandfathers got those water rights by winning that race, and taking the water away from them. Now you can say, well, let's just compensate them. Let's just pay them. It's going to be expensive. That's going to cost us a lot of money if we're going to condemn all of those water rights. And the other challenge I want people to be aware of is, if we're going to go to rural communities, agricultural and mining communities that have some of those very old water rights, or we're going to go to tribal communities that have very old water rights, and we're going to somehow expect that we're going to take and compensate them, especially with farmers and miners. You may have farmers who walk away with a big check in their pocket because they got their water rights and their land paid off, but what about the tractor repairman? What about the fertilizer salesman? What about that agricultural community that was there supporting those farmers? They didn't have water rights to sell, but their community got devastated by these new markets. And
then you've lost farming.
Right. And we all will pay for that in the grocery store eventually. And so I always want to caution people about, well, if we just build a really efficient water market, what will happen is the water will get spread out more equitably because the market will go to work. And I always want to say, I'm in favor of more efficient, more flexible water markets. I think it's an important tool, but we have to go into those kind of reforms with our eyes wide open about the potential consequences and how do we mitigate them and avoid them, because a pure water market might end up being us devastating agricultural communities and then having a bunch of water speculators hoarding a bunch of water rights that they bought and waiting for the price to go up.
And those hoarding speculators, if they take all those water rights away from our American farmers, they're going to starve to death.
Right.
And all they'll have is a lot of nothing and a dead body on themselves.
Right, and you'll hear sometimes people go, oh, well, 500 farmers should get more water than 5 million people. And there's something to that point, but I always want to caution people, before you say that, you should ask yourself, how many of those 5 million people are those 500 farmers feeding?
Yeah.
So,
and it might be the very same people.
Right.
That's very intimidating. Pausing for station identification, Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau and Rhett Larson here at the law school, the SU Law School, my alma mater. And it's Friday, so it's Talk to a Farmer Friday. Talk to a water attorney, and I'm learning a lot. This is amazing. So I also kind of studied that you worked on quantifying winters' rights, highlights, new state court approaches, and climate variability. How do unresolved or And completely quantified tribal water rights factor into Colorado River negotiations, especially now, and Arizona's broader water future.
So winters rights are federal water rights. So when federal parties when the federal government takes any federal land and sets it aside for any purpose, it implicitly creates water rights for the purpose of that reservation. Now, the one we think about most commonly are Indian reservations.
Okay.
So anytime the federal government creates an Indian reservation, it guarantees that reservation enough water to create a permanent homeland for those people. It's also a water right that they create anytime they create a military base or a national forest or any other federal land that gets set aside, they get water rights.
And that's called
Winters rights, named after a Supreme Court case called Winters v. United States, where this was created. They're also called federally reserved rights. Now, for tribes, most of the tribes in Arizona have now reached a settlement of their water rights. And tribal settlements usually involve the tribe saying, we will agree to take less water than we're entitled to, less of our winters rights than we're entitled to. In exchange, we want money to develop some water infrastructure. We want to diversify our water supply portfolio. And for a lot of tribes, that was, we want Central Arizona Project water. And so a lot of tribal settlements were built on the availability of CAP water. We want approval to lease our water off reservation, so it allows them to sell some access to their water to thirsty communities around them, and some protections about pumping around their land. That's what most settlements look like. Now, the settlements can be pretty expensive. The two settlements we have in front of Congress right now are Yavapai Apache, and then the San Juan Southern Paiute, Navajo, and Hopi settlements. If those move forward, tribal settlements have very, very senior water rights, generally speaking, in that prior appropriation regime. First in time, first in right. Guess who was super first?
Super first, yes.
So they tend to have very, very senior water rights at the front of the line. And the more certainty that we have at the front of the line, and the more flexibility that the people have at the front of the line to be able to exchange their water, the better it is for everybody behind them in line. So investing in tribal water settlements is really helpful for everyone, both because it gives us more certainty about who owns what amount of water, but it also gives us more flexibility because it allows those tribes to say, hey, let's strike a deal about how we might be able to trade some of our water, lease some of our water.
And make some money.
And make some money.
But here's this kind of a delicate question. Some of those prices might get kind of high. I can maybe see a city affording some of those tribal prices, but what about a farmer? And does that become a food scarcity, food security issue as well? Or am I overthinking this?
No, you're doing a great job, because my constant refrain to people right now when people are asking me about water is, we are not running out of water. We are running out of cheap water.
Wow.
And everyone has to embrace this new reality that water prices are going to go up. And I don't just mean that it's going to cost more per acre foot, or it's going to cost more at your tap and your utility bills. All of that is going to be true. But it also means the trade-offs that we're making are going to get more complicated. There may have been things that we really liked doing in the past at a scale that we just can't do at that scale anymore. But you're definitely right that I worry a lot about such a tight market, especially when a lot of deep pockets are coming in, when you have data centers and other new large industrial users that have very deep pockets. If they're entering into a water market and you have large cities that can spread their rates over a lot of people, and they're looking to buy water, whether it's from tribes or whether it's across borders, whoever they're looking to buy water from, it drives the price of that water up to have deep pockets in big cities, and it's going to make it harder and harder for farmers to be able to access affordable water supplies, which puts pressure on agricultural communities to produce more with less.
Right.
And then the real trick is our farmers are amazingly ingenious in the way that, incredibly efficient. But to achieve the efficiencies of cheese takes money, like laser leveling and end drip and biosynthetic membrane irrigation. All these advanced technologies our farmers are using, they're not cheap. And so one of the things I wonder if we can do is, can we create a system where farmers have access to new credit by companies that are investing in these technologies, and the companies make the loans to the farmers, and those loans are not secured by the farmer's land, they're secured by the savings in the water. so that the companies that have these new, more advanced technologies can make loans to farmers, and they're securing those loans betting on their own technology to save a lot of water.
That's so cool.
And so I'm wondering if there are new creative financing mechanisms that we can have to help farmers have access to capital and credit they haven't had in the past that keeps them from having to compete so directly in such a tight water market.
That's a very compelling conversation in and of itself. Joel, do we have any comments, questions? Anyone live with us that might have asked a question? If not, no worries. Again, this is Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau. We'll talk to a farmer Friday, and I'm interviewing Rhett Larson, law professor here at Arizona State University in downtown Phoenix.
We do have people that have joined, but no questions have
All
come
right,
in.
we're good.
We're doing a really good job at
Yeah,
this.
I think I'm asking way more questions than you probably wanted me to. So, and here's another little kind of delicate discussion. What's your assessment of Attorney General Chris May's nuisance lawsuit against Fondamonte?
Well, let's take this at a couple of different levels. First of all, rural Arizona isn't a monolith. So sometimes people go, rural Arizona has a groundwater crisis. And I'm like, we should always be careful about painting rural Arizona as if it's one big thing. Rural Arizona is lots of things.
Yeah. And varies dramatically from county to county.
Right, and so some places are definitely having very, very serious groundwater challenges where water tables are dropping rapidly, and a lot of it is being driven by large-scale irrigation in those regions. But it's not true of every part of Arizona. Now, in those places where you're seeing large-scale agriculture dropping the water table, one thing I have to ask people is, why do you care that it's Saudi Arabia? Because I want to ask that question, because if what you don't like is, I don't like a geopolitical rival having control over a critical natural resource. Maybe you're right, maybe that is a real concern. But that's not a groundwater concern. That's a national security concern.
Good point.
If your concern is groundwater, well, there are lots of companies from Minnesota that build farms in Arizona to grow alfalfa and then send it. The impact on our groundwater is exactly the same whether they're from Saudi Arabia or Minnesota. And Arizona farmers, generational legacy Arizona farmers, want to grow food and sell it outside of Arizona. So if
There's a market.
Right, and so
Yeah.
what you're saying is, I just don't like it when people take groundwater, embed it into melons or lettuce or alfalfa, and then send it outside of the state. If that's your objection, then you're having that objection has a big impact on our economy and our national food security. So I think we need to separate the issues of, is your concern that it's Saudi Arabia? If so, maybe we should have that conversation. Is your concern just groundwater management? I got news for you. Every farmer, wherever they're from, is growing produce that they want to sell outside of the state. Now, going to Attorney General May's lawsuit, I respect the desire to be able to protect people who are facing the costs of dropping groundwater levels. It's really, really expensive to deepen a well, and when you're in a situation that you've had a well for a long time and all of a sudden it's running dry, you want to find any possible way that you can to protect your water supply. But I think the chances of winning it on the merits are going to be difficult because there are explicit laws in Arizona statutes that say as long as you are farming reasonably, as long as you're doing what a normal farmer would do, your farming operation is not a nuisance. So I think Attorney General Mays will have a steep hill to climb to prove that Fondamonte is somehow acting outside of the industry norm in the way that they're farming. I think that's going to be a hard one to prove. Now, in her defense, maybe her response, and I don't know, I don't want to speak for her, but it is possible that the strategy here is less about what can I win in court than it is about using this litigation to highlight this concern in a way that compels the legislature to make some kind of a move to address, groundwater overdraft in rural communities. Maybe that's what this is about.
Yeah, but you are right. It's two distinct issues.
Right. If you're afraid of Saudi Arabia owning important resources, that's not a crazy point. But if you're
a completely different area that they'd have to address.
Right. Yeah, and so that's always, anytime people seem outraged by Fondamonte, I always want to stop them and go, which thing are you worried about? Are you worried that it's Saudi Arabia? In which case, we should talk about it, but that's not about groundwater overdraft. Or are you worried that farmers grow a lot of food that they sell outside of the state? If you're worried about that, I got news for you. That's what every farmer does.
Right. And we grow alfalfa so well, and to your point, you said earlier, anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12 cuttings in a season because our weather optimizes for that. You can't do that. Like you said, in Georgia, maybe they'll get 3 or 4 cuttings. And because we do it so well, there's a lot of people that have, a lot of countries that have to feed their people, Saudi Arabia being one of it. Because guess what? All that hay is going to their dairy cattle because they have a dairy industry in Saudi Arabia. My heart says it's a national and international food security issue for all of us. If we love people, if we appreciate people, we need to feed all people. So my heart kind of, gets a little soft there.
And we've proudly, as a nation, been the breadbasket for the world and fed people and been a major food exporter. I also feel like we have to show farmers the respect that we show any other industry, which is big semiconductor manufacturers use a lot of water to make semiconductors. And when they make a bunch of semiconductors and ship them outside of Arizona, everybody goes, yay, commerce. Why don't we treat farmers the exact same way as we treat semiconductor? They used a bunch of water, they made something people around the world want, and we sold it to them. I'm absolutely in favor of good, careful water management. I just don't know that sometimes we have this tendency as a state to want to simplify our water conversation, and we want to turn it into a fairy tale where there's a villain, a victim, and a hero.
Well, it gets more news that way.
Yeah, and it gets more news that way, but I think it's better for all of us to sort of embrace there are a lot of people who are trying to use water to do good things, to build homes, to attract tourism, to grow food, to make semiconductors, and none of these people are evil, and none of them are trying to steal your water. They're just trying to make things with water because everything takes water to make it, and we're all going to have to find ways to do more on less water, and pointing fingers at people and trying to make them out like they're the bad guy is just not very helpful.
It's not going to work. And the reality of it is, just for our listeners and anybody that watches this video later, there's different estimates. I want the University of Arizona or ASU to do the study so that we can give them a specific number, but anywhere from 15 to 20% of our alfalfa is actually exported out of state. So that shows that the vast majority of our alfalfa that we're growing here in Arizona stays in Arizona. And people say, okay, and most people should know, we hope they know, where is that alfalfa domestic hay that stays in state? Where's it going? To our dairy production, to our beef production, to our equine industry, which we sometimes have a tendency to completely forget that industry. There's a lot that, with our equine industry, of course, our rodeos and all this other stuff, but pleasure horses, all of that alfalfa hay is going for our livestock, which either enriches our life if it's a horse, keeps us alive because we eat dairy and beef. So that is the other thing that's very important for people to know, that the majority of the hay still stays in Arizona. And it, maybe it's up to 25% now that gets exported, but the fact of the matter is the majority of our Arizona alfalfa stays in Arizona.
80% of the dairy that Arizonans are getting in the grocery store is coming from our local dairies. Yes. And I understand if Arizonans look at the amount of water that goes to grow alfalfa, you're not crazy that you see that amount of water and go, oh my gosh. But what Arizona should know is, if you're going to ratchet down the water that's going to alfalfa production, and we may need to, you need to know that that choice is a choice you will pay for in the grocery store. Yeah. And so it might be part of our solution going forward, but it's not cheap. We'll all pay for it. And the other thing I tell people is, the Hohokam people, who were a great civilization in the Salt Valley, some of the greatest farmers in history, some of the most brilliant hydrologic engineers in history, their civilization collapsed. And it didn't collapse because of a drought. Those people knew how to manage a drought. It collapsed because of salt. They kept taking water from the Salt River and putting it on their crops, and salt built and built and built in the soil until it became toxic. And for every acre foot of Colorado River water we put on our soil, there is a literal ton of salt. Yeah. And one of the reasons that we grow alfalfa here is because it is a salt-resilient crop, and because when you irrigate it, it leaches salt out of the soil and keeps our soils healthy. So I understand that alfalfa uses a lot of water. It is a very thirsty crop, but people need to understand farmers are growing it because there's a market for it. Farmers are growing it because it helps feed us, and farmers are growing it because there's a salt issue that if we grow less alfalfa, we're gonna have to think about how to handle the salt. So I always wanna tell people, be careful about assuming that there are simple solutions. There are no simple
There are
solutions.
never simple solutions. Well, we're getting through the questions, and I'm excited. I'm learning a lot. Desal, recycling, and other augmentation technologies, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, feature in your research on innovation and international commons or commitments. Which approaches are more legally and practically feasible for the Colorado River Basin in the next decade, and what legal barriers remain for us to move forward with augmentation?
Well, desalination has already been implemented in the basin. We already have the Carlsbad plant in California. Mexico is expanding their desalination capacity, particularly in resort communities. It only makes sense for us if California already has a desal plant that's making more water than they need, we should have that conversation.
Right.
If Mexico is already building desalination plants, maybe we can help them expand them, and we can have, so I think desalination is going to be a really important part of the way that we move forward, but here's the challenge with desalination. We used to have desalination plants back in the 1980s. The only people who did it were very energy rich, very water poor countries like the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates.
Israel too, I think.
Well, Israel is a remarkable country in terms of the quality of their desalination facilities. They've built some really elite systems, but they've also taught us about how to get efficiencies. And the way that Israel in their Ashkelon plant, China has a plant in Xiamen, Spain has one in the Llobregat, the most efficient plant. So back in the olden days, it took 35 kilowatts to be able to make a single cubic meter of fresh water. The best plants in the world can do it at 2.5 now. So it's way more efficient. But to get that efficient, you have to co-locate the desalination plant with wastewater treatment so that you're able to put the brine stream into wastewater, and you need to co-locate it with power generation so that you're not losing electrons in transmission, and you need to integrate it with photovoltaic solar cells and pressure recycling systems. If you can do that, you get a very efficient desalination plant, but it takes land and it takes money, which means we're gonna have to coordinate with California and Mexico to be able to help build these kinds of facilities. And then we're going to help to reduce the sort of bureaucratic and legal barriers for engaging in exchanges using those facilities. So I'm optimistic about desalination in our future, but we do need to make some legal reforms to make exchanges simpler between jurisdictions. On the water recycling is really important. There are ways that we can facilitate it so that there are a lot of sort of water quality concerns that we need to maintain, but the bigger obstacle on water recycling tends to be, you'll get a lot of local opposition to it because people will say, you're making me drink my own pee. And my answer to people on that is, first of all water is recycled water. Yeah, every drop of water you've ever drunk in your entire life has passed through the urinary tract of some animal at some point in time. So get over it. Second, all we're doing with advanced water purification is doing what Mother Nature does. We're just doing it faster. We're just treating the water faster. Also, a lot of the water that's already in the Colorado River is just Las Vegas wastewater discharges anyway. Wow. So you're already drinking a lot of people's former pee. On top of that, if you look at the Central Arizona Project Canal or the canals in the Salt River Project, you don't want to drink that water. That water's not healthy for you. So the idea that what happens if the treatment system fails and I get untreated water through my tap? Well, that could happen today. And saying, a technology might fail, so I'm not going to use it. Well, that's like saying you wouldn't drive your car because your brakes might go out. The technology that recycles the water is safe technology. It's proven technology. Lots of jurisdictions do it. Now, you'll have some people who go, well, no community in Arizona does it right now, does direct potable reuse, so it must not be safe. And my answer to those people is, well, listen, imagine that you wake up every morning and you go to work by either taking the bus or the light rail. But one morning you wake up and the bus and the light rail are down, so you have to take an Uber into work, and it's more expensive. Did you not take an Uber before because Uber was dangerous? No, of course not. You just didn't take an Uber before because you had cheaper options. The same is true of advanced water purification. Cities in Arizona haven't been using it, not because it's not safe, but because they had cheaper options. They're running out of cheaper options. They have to start looking at more expensive options. It's very safe. It's just expensive.
Recycling the water one sounds like one of the most promising, actually. I heard a weatherman say, the hydrologic cycle that we were first given is basically the one we have today. Yeah. It's almost the same amount of water. But he says it's not evenly distributed.
Right.
And some of those distribution channels, aka rivers and stuff, have changed. But we still have that same amount of water in the world.
Yeah, I tell people sometimes, like, water scarcity isn't really about quantity, because enough water moves through the Rio de la Plata basin in Argentina in a day to give every human being on Earth more than enough water.
Wow.
There's more than enough water on the planet for everyone. What creates water scarcity isn't that there isn't enough water for everyone. What creates water scarcity is people don't necessarily live where the water is. Taking the water from where it is and bringing it to where the people are and making it clean costs a lot of money. And if it's deep down underground, you got to dig a really deep hole and use a lot of energy to pull it up. So sometimes when people are like, well, why is water costing a lot of money? Sometimes I want to tell people, you know what? You want free water, go get a bucket, hike all the way out to a river, fill your bucket up, hike all the way back home again, boil your water until it's clean, and when you're done, you're going to know why you pay water, because it costs a lot of money to move it and clean it.
And it doesn't seem like anything's getting cheaper. So Arizona's general stream adjudications remain a long-standing source of uncertainty for non-Colorado River supplies. How does progress or lack of it in those cases interact or intersect with Colorado River shortages and the need for groundwater management under the Groundwater Management Act?
Well, imagine a scenario where, let's do a little family financing to help people understand the challenge. Imagine a scenario where you have income coming from three sources. You've got a job that pays you $60,000 a year. You've got an investment property that pays you $60,000 to get you $60,000 in rents a year. And you've got a bank account that's got $100,000 in it, a low interest bank account. You're doing okay, right? Mm-hmm. That's a little bit like having water from the Colorado River is your job. Water from the Salt River Project is your investment property, and your bank account is your groundwater. Mm-hmm. Now imagine one day your boss comes to you and goes, you're going part-time, and so I'm cutting your salary in half to $30,000. That's what's about to happen to Arizona on the Colorado River. We're about to lose a bunch of our money. We have other supplies, but now you go, okay, well, if I'm going to lose that, I guess I could conserve, I could stop, I could not subscribe to Netflix, and I could cut back, but if you're like Arizona, you've already cut back on your water costs as much as you can. There's not a lot more you can cut back on your expenses. And so you're like, all right, well, I guess I could dip into my savings account, which is our groundwater, which we're going to have to do as at least a bridge. But dip into it too much and you'll start whittling it down if you're not replenishing it.
You get nervous about your bank account.
Right, and so the other thing that you could do is, well, maybe I could go invest in another property. I could go out and get another job. Well, investing in another property, if you're looking for another supply, what happens if you go out there and you're like, oh, no one knows who owns anything. All of the deeds in Arizona have been destroyed. So no one knows who owns what house.
That'd be a mess.
That is how water markets work in Arizona.
Oh, wow.
As long as the general stream adjudications persist, no one knows who owns what perfectly.
Wow.
And so if we want to respond to Colorado River shortages by being able to buy and sell and lease water rights inside of Arizona, the stream adjudication, as long as it keeps going, there's an enormous cloud of uncertainty about what your priority date is and how much water you have a right to. So resolving the stream adjudications, it's hard. One of the reasons that the current moment is so difficult for us isn't just that the Colorado River is creating real challenges, but that it is consuming all the oxygen in the room, so that other water challenges that are also serious, it's hard for us to pay attention to them. But sometimes I want to remind people, groundwater and general stream adjudication problems, they don't look like they're as big a problem as the Colorado River, but they're part of the solution to the Colorado River, and we still have to pay attention to them.
This may be an unfair question to ask you. Do you have any idea of how many are currently in adjudication here in the state of Arizona?
Oh, I think the total number of claimants in the two general streams, so we have one general stream adjudication in the Gila River Basin and one in the Little Colorado River Basin, which basically makes every single surface water right that isn't a Colorado River right is in the stream adjudication.
Okay.
And I think we are at, between the two, something like 120, 130,000 claimants.
Oh my goodness. This could just be...
It's not hyperbole to say that it is the most complex litigation in the history of the United States of America. It is an almost impossible knot to untie.
And so many hearts get wounded in the process. So many families may be losing their right to use that water.
It's really scary.
So many legacies maybe shut down. That just like hurts my heart.
Right. The scary thing about the stream adjudication is that for a lot of people, there are a lot of people who drilled wells in the 70s and the 80s, and they got permission from the Department of Water Resources, and they got permission from the state, and they did everything they were supposed to do. There was no such thing as a stream adjudication or subflow. They didn't know anything about this. They did everything they were supposed to do. They made no mistakes, and then there's a risk that looms over them. And so we have to find a way through the general stream adjudication that tells small subflow pumpers that there's light at the end of the tunnel and the light is not an oncoming train. That there's a way through this that says that a subflow pumper who drilled a well and did everything that they could were not coming to turn you off. And I think there are creative solutions to this that allow us to do it, but they're going to require some resources, and they're going to require unity. And unity in Arizona is something that is going to be one of my constant refrains going forward, which is a division between the states and the federal government right now over water is imagine we're all standing on a glass floor way up in a high rise, and imagine a crack appears in the floor. That crack we get nervous about. That's the crack between the states and the federal government. Now imagine another crack forms. That's the crack between the lower basin and the upper basin. You start getting nervous. The more cracks that form, the more likely that floor is to give way. And one of the things I tell Arizonans is right now, inside of Arizona, we have to hold together. Now is not the time for pointing fingers at people. Now is not the time for anger and retribution. We have enough cracks between us and the federal government and us and the upper basin. Arizona has to hold together. So if we are getting frustrated with each other, if we're getting angry with each other, let's take it into a side room and let's get creative and let's find solutions and let's hold together and stay a family, because we can't handle any more cracks.
Makes me think of Mel Gibson's Braveheart and all of those warring
all those clans.
And the clans finally got together and they're ready to fight the British, and he goes, hold, hold.
Right. That's what I feel like. Everybody in Arizona, we all need to be yelling like, hold, like, so we all need to stick together.
Wow. So you also advise a lot of municipal water users, and this is something that's important. What role do you see for the private sector, water markets, or infrastructure finance in buffering Arizona cities and agriculture against deeper cuts?
So I do think that the private sector we've already talked about a few things the private sector can do, like more creative ways for financing and access to capital and credit for farmers in making infrastructure investments for more efficient irrigation. We can also talk about attracting new markets. There were farmers who were considering shifting from growing corn to barley, but were like, there's not a premium market for barley until the Sinagua malt house came. And then there were farmers like, oh, you know what? The same thing might be true. You can yell at a farmer all day long that they should be growing agave, but if there aren't distilleries, why would they grow agave? Right. There's no one to buy it. So
one of our issues with that particular crop is widely. It has
great potential, but we don't have a rubber manufacturing.
Yeah, we don't have enough of a market.
So we need as a state to create the right incentives to attract more of a market for farmers to be able to make premium dollars off of these kinds of crop shifts. So that's another place where the private sector can do a lot of good. I do think that private sector innovation in cooling technology is going to be a big deal, because if we find ways to more effectively cool data centers without using as much energy and water, and if we can build that technology in a way that's scalable up to a nuclear power plant like Palo Verde. Back in the olden days, people were talking about, the great race is to build the best battery, because if you build a great battery, then all these renewable resources like solar and wind become more viable. And we've made vast leaps in battery technology. To me, like, the next place you want to see the private sector making real investments is cooling technology, because the world that we're living in right now for data centers, we're at the shallow end. We're not that far away from AI being integrated with quantum computing. And if you've ever seen a quantum computer, it's about the size of a Tic-Tac box, but its cooling system is about the size of a grain silo.
Wow.
It uses a lot of water to cool. And if that technology comes online, it's going to take the conversation we're having now about, oh, what do we do with these new industrial users using it, and it's going to blow it up. And so we need to focus on the private sector making investments in advanced, super energy and water efficient cooling technology. I also think that we can do, and again, I'm just going to keep beating the drum on a dedicated revenue source, is that all of us, private and public sector, federal, state, and local, coming together and building a long-term source that allows people who are putting their dollars into this pot, it allows us to say, we are taking that money and we are building that desalination plant. We are taking that money and we are building that water recycling plant. We are taking that money and we are lining those canals. We are taking that money and we are putting in those smart gates and those smart meters so that people can see, oh, I did pay some sales tax into this dedicated pot, but this is what I'm getting out of it, and it's keeping my water rates from exploding.
That's awesome. Okay, we got to do a lot of praying, I think. I only have 3 more questions. The human right to water and indigenous traditional ecologic knowledge appear in your scholarship. How should equity considerations, especially for tribes, rural communities, and environmental flows shape the next phase of the Colorado River management? And please don't forget our farmers, because again, if we don't have food, we can't live.
Well, and I'm from a rural Arizona community, and sometimes I wonder, I'm so proud of our state. Mm-hmm. I am so proud of how successful we have been in managing our water resources for so long. And we really are standing on the shoulders of giants. Mm-hmm. And we've done amazingly innovative things. The Salt River Project is an incredible achievement. The Central Arizona Project, an incredible achievement. The 1980 Groundwater Management Act, inventive, brilliant. We've done so many great things. And about every 30 years, we've done something amazing that reminds the world Arizona is the smartest water jurisdiction in the planet. We're about 15 years late on doing our next great thing. And I think it's time for Arizona to step up and do something great again that makes the whole world go, those guys are so smart. And I wonder why we're 15 years late.
Yeah.
And part of me wonders if in the past, so much of our civic and business leadership was coming from the mining and the agricultural community, and they are a very water literate community, and they were feeding into our political leadership. And so our political leadership tended to be very water literate. But because our economy is diversified, a lot more of our civic and business leadership that feeds into our political leadership live lives that are more attenuated from water. They don't live with water all the time the way farmers and miners did and ranchers did. And I wonder if it's just a steeper learning curve. I also worry that partisan politics has started to infect the way that we talk to each other about water. Water is by its nature very political, but it has tended to not be terribly partisan. It tends to be rural versus urban, tribal versus non-tribal, this industrial sector versus that industrial sector, citrus farmers versus pecan farmers versus alfalfa farmers. But it didn't have anything to do with being Republican or Democrat or conservative or progressive. And I worry that extra level of division is starting to infiltrate into water politics, and it's making it harder for us to come up with solutions. And so I want to fight back against that tide. Partisan politics is a totally legitimate way to frame lots of important public policy issues. It's not terribly relevant to water. Water's political enough, we don't need to add that other layer.
Well, and to your point, if a lot of these people now in leadership positions are now water illiterate, not literate, not wise with water and knowledge of it like our farmers and ranchers, and yet they're having these powers of position. No wonder we're struggling with some of the water.
And I think,
and it's not being a criticism.
No,
but
water's
very
complicated.
complicated.
Yeah, it's just really complicated. And if you've spent your career working in healthcare and you're an outstanding healthcare provider, you've worked in insurance, you've worked in the high tech sector, it's great, and you're going to know a lot about different aspects of the Arizona economy. But when we get into it's time to start talking about the Colorado River, it's time to start talking about groundwater management, and you've never seen a well drilled in your whole life.
Yeah.
And it's a steep learning curve. And it does mean that for a lot of Arizonans coming into an election season, it's going to be more and more important for Arizonans to set a higher bar on water literacy for elected officials. This gets us into the equity question that you asked, which is, how do we pay attention to protecting our rural communities, and the way of life of rural communities, the kind of community that I grew up in Yuma, that I want to see thrive and persist, and that is making sure that there are guardrails so that they aren't seen as just the water trough, and that we understand and appreciate the value of what our farmers and our ranchers are giving us, and that we're getting the message out that any burden that we place on them is a burden we place on all of us, because they're feeding all of us.
Right.
On the tribal side, we have done, first of all, just like rural Arizona isn't a monolith, our tribes are not monoliths.
Yeah.
They're very diverse.
Very diverse.
Some of our tribes have outstanding representation. They're exceptionally sophisticated water players. They're real innovators in the field where they're teaching us a lot, and they've shown us how to do really great things. And then there are some of our tribes who continue to be marginalized and not listened to. And so I think there are ways that we need to be more careful about making sure that tribes are integrated, that they're treated with the respect as co-equal sovereigns with us. I worry sometimes when I hear, when we have a Rio Verde foothills water issue, and I watch the amount of political urgency to respond to people in Rio Verde foothills facing a very scary water crisis. And I do worry that why was there so much concern about responding to Rio Verde foothills not having water, but we don't feel the same urgency to address water insecurity for our brothers and sisters in tribal countries and tribal nations. We need to feel the same urgency to protect them as we feel to protect people in Rio Verde foothills, which is no Arizonan should be afraid of not having enough clean water.
Right.
And that needs to apply to all of us across the board.
We are all people.
Yeah.
We are all.
And it's all one tide family, and
Yep.
we all depend on one another on taking care of the environment. I mean, when we talk about the 5 C's, we are like, the 5 C's represent mining, ranching, and farming. But there's another C in there that we need to always remember, which is it's tourism. This is a beautiful state. It is, hands down, no question, the most beautiful state in the world. And everyone should come here. It's gorgeous. But we're not going to be this beautiful state where everyone wants to come hunting, fishing, kayaking, and hiking if we don't take care of the natural world. If we don't care for natural flows. If you've been to Hannigan's Meadow, if you've been to Aravaipa Canyon, this is God's country.
It is God's country.
And it's so beautiful. And every Arizonan should feel defensive. I love the idea that I live in a state where there's a wild jaguar walking around right now. I don't want to lose that.
Yeah.
So protecting that is so important, and making sure that those issues are represented. And then there gets to this other thing. This goes back to the conversation we had earlier about water, as a symbol of sovereignty. One of the reasons that water markets are hard is that people aren't rational about water. And it's because it means something. Water is everything that oil and coal and uranium is. It is a valuable, saleable commodity. But it is also everything that faith and family and poetry and music is. It means something. We don't squirt each other with oil in the summertime. We don't throw lumps of coal at each other in the wintertime.
Yeah.
And we don't baptize people in uranium. It's a different resource.
I
it's
love that.
special.
Yeah.
And if we don't appreciate that it's special, that it has cultural meaning, then we're going to struggle to manage it.
We really are. Looking beyond all that's going on, and now that the 2-year plan has come out, and these next 2 years will be pretty intense, but do you have any predictions? Do you have any crystal ball? Maybe it's what you said earlier. We just have to Arizonans have to stick together. We can't be fighting internally.
I'm really optimistic about Arizona internally. I do think that Arizonans, we have to start shifting our mindset. One is that whatever's going to happen in these next several years, the Colorado River is just a less dependable supply than it used to be. And expecting litigation to solve that problem is probably not the wise investment. We need to start making plans going forward. It doesn't mean that we don't defend our rights to the Colorado River. We have to defend them to the
Right.
hilt. But it does mean that we have to start making provisions for the fact that it has become less reliable. And so we have to start dedicating resources we need to diversify and augment our water supplies in other ways to prepare for just a less reliable Colorado River. I think Arizona also needs to change our mindset from, we need to start, to take a football analogy, we need to start moving away from a prevent defense. We need to play to win, which means we seem to be afraid of failing rather than trying to win. And so I want to see Arizona get to the point where it's like, rather than the national headlines always being, Arizona's getting water cut, Arizona's facing water. I want our national headlines to be, look at this amazing investment Arizona has made. Look at this incredible new program Arizona has. Look at this new legal reforms that Arizona is taking. We need to get out ahead of this so that the media coverage of us is, these guys are just geniuses, rather than a constant state of crisis. Because eventually the drumbeat of it's a constant state of crisis, perception will become reality, and it will affect our economy. So we need to get out in front of that. I do think we are probably going to sue each other, the upper basin and the lower basin states, but I am, perhaps naively, hopeful that litigation will catalyze negotiation. Unfortunately, I think that the litigation won't catalyze negotiation unless it's also combined with some rough hydrology, which I think is probably going to happen in the next few years. I think we're going to learn a lesson that as painful as the cuts that we're taking now are, they probably aren't going to be enough. And if that happens, then even the upper basin will go, the federal government's going to release water from our dams to prop up Powell. We need to have more of a say in the way that happens. And I think that will push us to negotiate better, which is why even in the short term, I think we're going to face litigation. In the medium and longer term, I'm a little more optimistic that there will be a deal.
So maybe you've answered my last question. Are you hopeful?
Oh, I'm always hopeful. I'm a terminal optimist. Part of that is history. The history of Arizona is a history of water problem solving. I'm concerned that we're not doing it as fast as we used to. Some weight seems to be holding us down. But our history tells us we come together and we come up with great solutions, both into Arizona and even across the Colorado River Basin. Our history has tended to be more cooperation than conflict. And so I still think history predicts we'll come together. I also think that water tends to be a force. It tends to be more of a uniting force than it is a dividing force. It usually pulls people together ultimately. And the other reason that I'm hopeful is you've seen a few of them walk by. I have the privilege of teaching the next generation, and I'm telling you, we have a remarkable group of leaders in the wings, and it's hard to be pessimistic when I teach such brilliant minds and such wonderful hearts.
Wow. Rhett, Larson, thank you for this interview. This has been eye-opening and mind-blowing in more ways than one. I love your analogies and your metaphors. I feel like I understand the water situation way better, and I am honored to have met you. So thank you so much. And for those that were watching this and will watch this later on our website, just know this water series is continuing on Talk to a Farmer, Talk to a Rancher, Talk to a Stakeholder, Talk to a Water Lawyer. Friday. Stay tuned. Take care.
Thank you.